I want to start by showing you something, and then I want to tell you what's actually underneath it, because the two things together are really what matter. We just released the Command Zero public API to demonstrate what the API surface makes available or possible. Now, with that, one of the first things we did was built an MCP server on top of the API, which allows for a natural language investigation interface that to be run inside Claude code or realistically any of your chatbots. So let me show you that interface. Now, as an analyst comes in and opens up their shift, in previous work, they have to go to multiple consoles or their SIM. And instead of having to navigate to that console or any one of their terminals, they can just come in here and go ahead and before we start, just check the health of our underlying system. Now that everything's green, our credentials are valid, and the service is fully operational, we can ask it to produce a SOC dashboard view. Now, in the background, Claude is actually making a series of live calls against the Command Zero environment. It's querying the active investigations by status and severity. It's checking what's sitting in the pending review, pulling recent verdicts from completed cases, and what comes back within a few seconds is a number of investigations that are. We've received this dashboard view. It's going to outline the totality of what our operations environment looks like. We've got 50 total investigations, 10 of which are active and 30 which are pending review. Of course, one of the most important is knowing which ones are critical. So we can do that by just saying, show me what the critical investigations found. This is going to query with that filter applied for all of those investigations that are pending that are already rated by the autonomous investigation agent and rated with a high criticality. Now, from here, we can review the information provided, which is pretty robust information that is coming straight back from the APIs. And Claude is utilizing the MCP tool to get the investigation information. We can further query this to say which assets were impacted by the critical or in the critical investigations. This is going to go and parse out that information and retrieve any and all assets that were involved with those. Now that it's complete analyzing, this really highlights one of the increased capabilities because there's a lot of inference that can be made based on the data that's available and being extracted from those investigations. Here, Claude's highlighted that both of those critical investigations had the same attacker origin, but split into two different attacks. It then highlights each one of the assets that were involved, as well as those entities appearing in both investigations. It also highlights any unresolved risk. Of course, at the end, it really shows us what we wanted to know, which were the two core victims. Here, we can actually make an inquiry and leverage another tool that's made available by Command Zero's API and the underlying MCP that we created. We can simply ask what remediation actions or options are available for those users. The thing that's great here is even with those typos, Claude or any of the GPT models still understand what you're asking and can make that resolution and map the tools and capabilities available by the underlying MCP. Now, under the hood, Claude is actually calling the remediation templates endpoint, which are filtered based on our identity provider that we've set up. Here, we have a number of different options that are coming back based on our identity provider, as well as the endpoint which was involved. We can isolate that host, restore it if we make a mistake, And we can even enable or disable the actual users. But here, we're making that call and leaving that judgment to the analyst. The analyst can make that call to disable the user or even resolve that host or remediate that host by taking that isolation. All those remediations work upstream. So they're taking advantage of some of the native capabilities of your existing infrastructure, not imposing any new type of functionality or new calls and new things to track. Now, another thing that the analyst can do based on what's available, because there are 25 tools registered, analysts can come in here and they can just triage. This is going to present a list of all of what's outstanding. It's very similar to the SOC dashboard, but it's a little bit more tactical. Here, it's just going to give a level of understanding and outline all of the underlying investigations that still aren't resolved or are pending review. Well, that actually gave me a different answer that I was looking for. This is now giving some guidance to that user based on what we just did. So this is one of those areas where, again, Claude, because I didn't use the actual command, just said, okay, based on what we're doing, I want to sequence this together. Here's what I'm recommending to you. Now, if we wanted to triage things, what we could do is just use the command 0 MCP to /triage. And from there, we can now triage all of those investigations. We can actually triage all of the investigations within command 0. What it's going to do is read the underlying command 0 skill that was included within the MCP. And similar to our SOC dashboard, it's now going to pull a list of all of those unresolved, unassigned investigations that are still pending review. Here, analysts can identify which ones are interesting or which ones are within their area of expertise or the criticality to then work through each investigation. So we're presented with a summary of all of our investigations. They're broken down by criticality, giving us the 9 that are critical and high and needing review, the additional 9 that are already in progress, and also any errors or things that need our attention. What's really cool here is as a SOC manager or even as an analyst manager, I can actually make further inquiries into my assignment queue. I could say which of my analysts do not have any investigations assigned. Another thing that can be done here is you can actually keep tabs on those analyst workflows to see what the time to conclude or remediate those investigations are, what their time to close is, as well as which analysts haven't had any assigned to them in the previous week. This allows you as a SOC manager, analyst manager, to adequately manage your investigation review queue. So now we've got all of those analysts, and of course, I myself have nothing listed. So I've been slacking off a little bit on my investigation queue as well. So I'll go ahead and just scroll back up, and using some of this data, I can go ahead and take one of these, and now I can tell Claude to assign the investigation with the title similar to Eric Hulse. And it's going to leverage those APIs to actually make that assignment. It's very easy for any of the analysts or the SOC managers to escalate from here, move those assignments, or assign any of the individuals the investigations. That'll, of course, show up in their workflow. And then anytime they triage it, they'll be able to realize, hey, there is a new investigation going on and is sitting in the queue. Now, everything you just watched was all an API call. And this was just an example because the public API that we're releasing this week exposes the platform surface. There's 25 endpoints covering investigation management, remediation execution, user and assignment workflows, business context enrichment, and the entirety of the typing system. Every interaction in that demo maps to a specific API endpoint. The MCP server is really just a layer on top of that API that makes it accessible through natural language inside things like Claude Code. We built the MCP ourselves on the same API that you now have access to, and that's intentional. It's a working demonstration of what the surface makes possible, not a closed product that happens to have an API attached. If the MCP interface works for your team as is, it's available and ready to go. But if your environment calls for something different, maybe a SOAR playbook that triggers investigation in parallel with your existing enrichment layer, or a Slack-based triage interface for on-call analysts, maybe even a custom dashboard that surfaces Command Zero findings alongside your EDR and identity data, the API surface is open to build on. One thing worth being precise about is what you're accessing through the API isn't just investigation data. It's the investigation methodology built into Command Zero. How it sequences questions about identity and access, how it surfaces or structures blast radius analysis, and how it formats those findings for the analyst review. That's logic that travels through the API as well. And when you integrate Command Zero into your automation layer, you're not pulling another data source. You're pulling an expert investigative logic into your workflows. So, a quick note on how this is designed to work. The analyst is still the decision maker throughout the entire process. The API automates the orchestration. It surfaces those findings and presents options. It executes the actions that you, the analyst, authorize. But in every step you watch, the analyst decided what to act on and when. And that's not incidental. That's the model. The automation handles the logistics, but the analyst continues to own the judgment. The API documentation is available and listed below. And that's where to start if you're thinking through integration architecture for your environment. The MCP server repository is there as well. Whether you want to run the natural language interface directly or use it as a starting point for something custom. And if you want to work through how Command Zero fits in your specific environment, reach out to us. That conversation is exactly what shapes where the API surface goes next.